Hi, and welcome to a series of lectures made available for Introduction to Business. My name is Matt Alanis. I'm a business instructor at the Willow International Center, and these lectures are actually recorded for a course that I teach out at that particular college here. Obviously, we make those available to the public as well. These are recorded specifically for that course. This isn't something that I just record as I provide lecture to my face-to-face courses as well. So it's specifically for online and obviously tailored for that particular reason here. As far as this material here, the course that I teach out at Willow is a 3-day-a-week course, so we do cover one chapter, usually in 3 to 4 class sessions. So it is a little bit difficult to condense that amount of material into a short online lecture, so to speak. So I do record multiple sessions of each particular chapter. I kind of break them up, so to speak, and I think that's a little less daunting to listen to one 30-minute session as opposed to an hour and 30, hour and 45 minutes, because we do have a lot of material to cover. So if you get to a point to where maybe we're going a little too fast, or maybe it's a little too much material, feel free and pause, obviously come back to it. That's one of the benefits of obviously taking online courses, is you can kind of go at your own pace, so to speak. So alright, so let's go ahead and get started here. This chapter introduces you to the concept of business, specifically businesses in the U.S. We talk about some of the fundamentals. We discuss the environment. We discuss the economy, basically everything that potentially can have an impact on businesses here in the U.S., although we'll discuss some of the environments that are outside of the U.S. and some other countries and different economic systems here. But to kind of lay the framework, so to speak, we want to first get some definitions out of the way so that we have a solid grasp of what we're going to cover so we can move forward. The first is this concept of an actual business here. A business is an organization that provides goods and or services that it sells to earn profits. Profits are a key differentiator between obviously a business and maybe a nonprofit organization. A profit is a difference between a revenue and an expense. Okay, a revenue is something that the company would receive for selling goods and services. So the easy way to determine your revenue is to multiply the number of goods you sold or services offered by the number by the price of those particular goods and services per unit, and that will give you an idea of what your revenues are. Okay, revenue is essentially like the income for a person like you and I, for an individual. The money that we receive from our job obviously would basically be our revenue. Now expenses are outgoing. Expenses are things that you pay. For businesses, expenses include everything from labor, obviously paying your people to work, could be overhead, leases, keeping the lights on, rent, those types of things. Could be marketing materials, could be costs to acquire goods, so if you can later resell them. Obviously, if you're a retailer like Target or Walmart, you had to pay someone to acquire those goods so you can put them on your shelf for resale. So that all takes money. So the difference between your revenues and your expenses is essentially your profit. It's what you have left over to do different things with. If you're a public institution, you can pay dividends to actually your shareholders. You can reinvest that back in your company. You can do all sorts of different types of things. But that's the basic fundamentals of businesses and profits. Now, profits are interesting because they provide people with incentives to operate businesses. If there wasn't this incentive of profits, most people would not be interested in starting their own business. Okay, there are many people that are passionate about what they do, but the idea of doing something and not getting paid is a little disconcerting, so to speak. So profits do provide that incentive to encourage people to start small businesses. As you probably know, a majority of the hiring that's done here in the U.S. is as a result of organizations that have less than 500 employees. So hiring from small businesses definitely does matter. So without profits as an incentive, that could come into play and could be negatively impacted by it. The next thing is that profits do provide a reward for their owners. If you're starting a business, or if you've operated one for any period of time, you know that early up front is the most difficult and trying time. You typically aren't earning profits for quite some time. And so profits provide you ultimately with that reward for the time, for the energy, blood, sweat, and tears that you invest in this idea that you have in an attempt to obviously make it big and hopefully come to fruition. So profits serve a number of different benefits, of course. Now, what's interesting about the U.S. environment in particular is that obviously if you're a business owner, you have a choice in terms of what you offer, at what price you offer it at, and where and when that you offer a product or a service. But what business owners also have to be cognizant of, or aware of more likely, is the consumer choice and demand, so to speak. And what I mean by this is we all have choices as consumers. When you go to the store, you have a choice in terms of what you buy. You have a choice between competing brands. You have a choice to buy a particular product altogether. So businesses need to be aware of what consumers want. They need to be in tune with what their customers' interests are so they can design products and services that are ultimately going to be something that people want. Obviously, if you manufacture something that no one has an interest in, you can spend all of the money in the world trying to design the best product, but if there isn't a demand for it, as we've seen from a lot of different consumer products that have been failures, no one is going to buy them, and it's going to negatively impact your business as well. The next thing is opportunity and enterprise. Obviously, with this idea of profits, it provides people with an opportunity and an encouragement to operate new businesses and different things. So with competition the way it is, it encourages businesses to be innovative. It encourages them to design products and services that are going to better equip us or better serve us in an attempt to acquire market share or to acquire more sales. Competition is good. We like competition because it forces companies to be innovative. It forces them to design the best products and services the cheapest way so that people will buy them. So we definitely do like that. Like I said before, we as consumers will benefit from that very significantly. Now, there are also many different benefits of business as well. Obviously, one of the most that I just mentioned is it provides goods and services. Obviously, we need to purchase things such as food, clothing. Obviously, those are considered to be almost necessities. But we also purchase different things. Durable goods. We purchase vehicles, homes, electronics, all those different types of things as well. And businesses provide those to us. And as I said before, this idea of competition does encourage businesses to offer the best products and services they can as a way of differentiating themselves from competition. So that is very crucial. The next component of a benefit for business is they do employ workers. Obviously, many of us work for businesses. So as a result, that provides us with the ability to earn an income, which is great because obviously if we were going to be able to buy things and provide for our families and put food on the table, we have to earn some type of income. And businesses allow us the opportunity to be employed, of course, which is great. Businesses also provide innovation and opportunities. Obviously, this is kind of in line with competition, of course. Most people forget, but an example that I usually give is with regards to Apple computers. Apple computers usually hasn't been the first to develop a particular technology, but they always did it typically the best. And so one of the examples that I usually give is with regards to the Macintosh computer that came out in the early 1980s. Apple, the technology they use in the computer, mainly the mouse that we all know and love, and the graphical user interface, which is commonly referred to as a GUI, which is the desktop that has the icons. Remember, before that time, in order to get anywhere on a computer, you had to type in the actual file path. So you were typing in exactly the address on your computer that you needed to go to access a file. Now all we do is we click on icons and then the computer directs us there itself. So it's very easy to use, but that wasn't common at this point in time. And Apple, Steve Jobs, who was the chairman at the time, and a lot of the different his colleagues and people that he worked with went to a kind of private screenings, if you will, of a Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center, and this was in the early 1980s. And they were demoing different technology that they were working on. And Xerox, as you know, is commonly known for printers, copiers, and those types of things. But they had developed this technology of an archaic form of a mouse. And it obviously didn't roll very well. It didn't have obviously they don't have the infrared that they do now more commonly, but they used the little circular ball, and that wasn't even commonplace at that time. They had a couple of wheels, and so it was kind of clunky, didn't work very well. But Steve Jobs is sitting in the room and he realizes just what they found, something that can revolutionize the personal computer industry, something that hadn't been done before. Because remember, at this time, it was all about typing in file paths and going everything the long way. And so at this time, he realized what they had a gold mine here, and this was just a great opportunity. And so that some people say that's one of the biggest failures of Xerox, because they failed to recognize that that was truly an opportunity. And as we know, obviously, it's commonplace now for all computers that we use. But I would even argue that even if Xerox wanted to pursue it, they didn't have the technical manpower, they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the expertise to make it happen. That wasn't their skill set, obviously. They were just investing in this as a way of improving technology. And Apple obviously was able to use that, commercialize it, and then give it to the point to where it's almost ingrained in society. But once again, if Apple wasn't concerned necessarily with being innovative and wanting to outdo IBM and Microsoft, which were the big evils at the time, they would not have seen that as an opportunity, and they would not have attempted to commercialize that. So innovation and opportunity is an important benefit of businesses. The next thing is enhanced personal income for owners and stockholders. A lot of large companies are public, meaning that they actually trade stock on an open exchange. So if a company is successful and they're profitable, that will benefit not only the owners, but also stockholders potentially as well. So when Apple has a positive earnings quarter or comes out with a new product, it beats sales in the iPhone 4S or whatever it is, you can most commonly or more frequently you will see an adjustment in the stock price in accordance with that. And that benefits stockholders. That benefits people that own that stock as part of a 401k. It benefits people that have mutual funds that are somewhat invested in the stock of a particular company. So that's another primary benefit of businesses as well. And lastly, support for charities and community leadership. Regardless of your question as to the intent of this, businesses do provide a lot of money to local charities, obviously community leaders as well. And even if you question whether or not their motivation is entirely pure, you can't argue that businesses have a lot of money at their disposal. And so that does provide benefit for a lot of charities because that's money that they would not normally have and now have at their disposal. All right, I want to spend a little bit of time here discussing the external environments of business. Now, an external environment is essentially anything that's outside of a business's boundaries that can have an effect on that. Remember that these are things that businesses can't control. You can't change what's going on in your external environment, but you can adapt to it. You can attempt to maybe foresee it coming and develop a plan in place to go against that, so to speak, and prepare for it, or some type of contingency planning. And so it's important for businesses that they prepare for these types of things because bad things do happen. They happen all the time, and it's important to be prepared, as you all know. Now, there are 6 areas in the external environment that we're going to review here. The first of which is the domestic business environment. We also have the global business environment. We have the technological, the political and legal, the sociocultural, and lastly, economic environments. And we'll go over these one by one here. All right, the first of which is the domestic business environment. Now, this includes anything that happens in the domestic environment in which the company primarily conducts its business. So obviously I've mentioned Apple computers as an example before just to stay with a consistent theme. Well, we'll continue to use them for the purposes of our examples here. But Apple obviously is located in Cupertino, California, which is on the Bay Area, and so that their domestic environment would be the U.S. Obviously they conduct a large part of their business in the U.S. They're headquartered here. That would be their domestic business environment. Obviously Apple does business around the globe as well, but this would be their domestic environment because they primarily drive a lot of their revenue from the U.S. Now, there's a couple of things that you have to consider with regards to the domestic environment. The first of which is your customers. You obviously want to be close to your customers. You want to know what are the things that they're looking for. What do they want? Steve Jobs always had an interesting take on customers because he always thought that market research and focus groups and asking customers what they wanted was a bad thing, which is contrary to what a lot of market researchers will tell you. They're all about finding out what your customers want and those types of things. But his take was rather interesting. And the reason that he thought that it wasn't positive is he said that customers don't know what they want until they see it. They only know what they've seen. And obviously Apple at the time and continues to develop new technology that obviously nobody thought of, or something that we didn't think of at that point in time. You know, we get used to doing business and operating a certain way. And so he felt like it was his job to introduce new technology that maybe people didn't want initially, but obviously grew to know and love. Next, obviously, is building relationships with suppliers. Potentially, if a supplier goes out of business, it can have a very negative impact on your own business, particularly if that is the only supplier that you have for something. So it is always important to have good relationships with suppliers, to have long-lasting relationships with suppliers. You don't want to necessarily get into a bidding war and trying to get the lowest possible price for your components, because you can risk damaging the relationship, and it's extremely problematic to have to switch between suppliers over and over and over. Apple Computers uses many different suppliers for the chips that they use in their tablet computers and in their actual laptop computers and different things, from the LCD screens they use on the iPad, all different sorts of things. So they try to maintain good relationships with those suppliers and not necessarily nickel and dime them, because they know it's a longer lasting relationship, so to speak. And lastly, competition. Competition is very important. Obviously, you don't know specifically what's going on with competition, but you can at least try and keep your ear to the ground, so to speak, and find out what's going on. For Apple specifically, obviously we've seen a lot of entrants into the kind of smartphone market, if you will. The iPhone just past its, I think, 4-year anniversary of introduction, and since that point in time, after maybe a year and a half after the iPhone was introduced, you're starting to see products that are very, very similar to it. Obviously, if someone is successful at doing something, you tend to get competition at it. It's just kind of the nature of how things go. Same thing with the tablet market. The iPad came out, was obviously successful at what it did, and then you're starting to see new entrants into the market. Amazon just introduced the Kindle Fire, which they're selling below cost, and just came out in November. The reason they're selling that below cost is the idea is that you would spend money on obviously putting books on it and putting music and downloading videos and all those different types of things, and they would make their money up kind of on the back end, so to speak. It's a way to get you hooked initially so that you have to buy obviously things to put on the device, right? Because it's not just fun looking at it is kind of has a neat form factor to it, pretty sleek, but you do want to actually do things with it, of course. That kind of goes without saying. All right, the global business environment. Obviously, because we live in such an interconnected society, it matters what happens across the globe. Not only do we have to be concerned about what happens in our local communities and in our nations, but we also have to be concerned about what happens internationally, because those forces can have a drastic impact on the things of business. So we need to be aware of them. It's very, very important. Things like international trade agreements can have a significant impact on whether or not you can actually import or export your particular products. Most companies, or most, not companies, but countries sometimes establish quotas. And those quotas are designed to protect certain industries. So for example, the U.S. Auto industry, or the U.S. has had quotas in place for Japan-made automobiles because they wanted to protect the U.S. auto manufacturing industry, because there was this flood of Japanese cars into the market back in the 80s, and they were priced very, very low because their costs were low, and the U.S. auto industry had no way of competing. So as a way to protect the U.S. auto industry from failing, the U.S. government imposed quotas, only allowing a certain number of vehicles from Toyota, Honda, Nissan into the country, and as a way of protecting the U.S. auto industry. Now, what most foreign companies have done as a way of getting around that, as you know, is that they establish plants in the U.S. because if you've made it in the U.S. with U.S. workers, obviously on U.S. soil, U.S. labor, equipment, materials, those types of things, then obviously you're not importing it anywhere or exporting it anywhere for that matter. So there is nothing in place about building it in the U.S., which a lot of companies like Japan, Honda, and Nissan, they primarily build a lot of their automobiles in the U.S. to get around those quotas and those types of things. International economic conditions is also very important. Depending on what's happening internationally in terms of the economy, that will affect the demand for different products and services. So if the standard of living drops internationally in a certain country, that can have an impact on ultimately the demand for your products or your services. Political unrest is obviously something that affects us significantly. We've seen within the last year political unrest in places like Libya and Egypt and all these other countries out kind of in the Middle East. And that political unrest has had an effect on things back here at home, particularly because those types of countries are oil-producing countries. And whenever there's political unrest in an oil-producing country, everybody starts to get concerned because they believe that oil is going to start to go up in terms of how much it costs per barrel, which is going to affect what you and I pay at the pump, so to speak. So there is great concern for what happens in some of the areas of the world politically. You look at what's happening economically in Europe right now. There's a lot of turmoil going on. Is Italy going to default? You know, they're paying upwards of possibly 7% on an actual bond at times, which is an exorbitant amount for a bond, so there's no way they can continue to sustain that since they're paying interest on it. So those are things that are concerning. And if you look at the stock market and the Dow Jones Industrial Average, you'll see that depending on what happens in Europe, it greatly affects the Dow. If we have negative news coming out of Europe, the Dow will likely be negative for the day. So we live in a very interconnected society, and we have to be aware of what's happening. International market opportunities also. You're seeing a lot of companies, mainly Google, for example, is realizing just how big of a market China is for internet search. They have 500 million people or potential internet users in China, and Google is realizing that that's an extremely high number, obviously, and is a great opportunity. So that is an opportunity for them for advertising and mobile advertising and utilizing internet search, and so they're pursuing that. So companies also have to be aware of market opportunities and trends as well. Next, suppliers. Suppliers internationally is very interesting because, as we've seen in 2011, the earthquake in Japan and subsequent tsunami ravaged that part of ravaged the area of Japan and all the areas along the coast, so to speak. And so a lot of suppliers were located there, and so you had companies like Honda, for example. A lot of Honda dealerships couldn't offer and sell vehicles because they couldn't get parts for them. You had a lot of body shops that were trying to order parts for repairs that couldn't find them anywhere because they were made in Japan and shipped over. And it caused a bottleneck, so to speak, in terms of productivity, in terms of operations. And so what happens internationally with regards to suppliers obviously has an impact what happens back home as well. Cultures is extremely important too. You have to be aware of what happens or what's the culture of a particular area. Obviously things don't operate just as they do here in the U.S. People in Japan conduct business very differently than they do in the U.S. And so when you're engaging in conversation with different areas of the world, you have to be aware of culture. You have to be aware of what your slogan is, for example, translated in a certain culture, because sometimes there's intricacies involved with translating, and what you think it says will not be what it means. Most commonly, I always laugh about Chevy, for example. They produced the Chevy Nova in Mexico back some time ago, and Nova, translated directly in Spanish, is no go. And so Chevy was kind of concerned, what happened? Why did nobody buy anything? It's like, well, the product is called no go, so people were kind of hesitant to go ahead and buy that just for fear of concern of it ultimately not working. So that's one thing to be considerate of too. Next is competition. Obviously internationally, you have to be aware of competition because we live in a global society. Things that happen overseas, things that competitors do in certain markets have a direct impact on what happens back home as well. So once again, something to definitely consider. And lastly, currency values. Changes and fluctuations in currency can have an impact on what you're paying. If the currency in a certain country goes up significantly, it now is more expensive for you to do business in that particular country. So that is something that has to be managed as well. All right, as if that wasn't enough to worry about, there also is the political and legal environment. Politically, what we have to worry about is what happens, how do we, as a business, what is our relationship with local governments. We have to be cognizant of laws and different regulations that can potentially impact us, of course. There are a lot of different things that have happened. Most of you are probably familiar with what happened with Google. Google tried to offer its internet search services in China. And what happened is that China, as you know, very much controls the information that their consumers and their people actually get. They don't want anything to be anti-government sentiment. They want to control the information. And Google, obviously's main mission is providing information to people in its most basic form, unhindered. We want to get the information out to people as quickly as we can and in the most purest way. So Google had a very big problem censoring its search results, is basically what China wanted. And in 2010, they essentially pulled away from China, saying they weren't going to offer internet search results because they felt like it was going against their own philosophy and having to censor that information. Now, recently, Google has come out and has said that they're going to be going back into China. And when I say going back, I mean with obviously more emphasis. They do have about 500 employees in China, 300 of which are engineers. But they're going to be kind of pursuing it more aggressively in terms of offering internet search capabilities and those types of things as well. So those are things that are going to happen. Obviously, you have to be aware of what happens within a particular country. These are just a couple things that need to be considered, of course. Oops, I went a little too far. Products. Obviously, advertising practices can vary. In the U.S., we are relatively strict in terms of our advertising. During children's television hours, you can't be advertising certain types of things, alcohol, cigarettes, those things. In Europe and in different areas of the world, that's considered to be okay. So an advertiser in the U.S. would have to be aware, if they're going to advertise in Europe, that those things do matter, and you have to change those types of things if you're going to be allowed to operate internationally. Next, the technological environment. Technology is extremely important. Obviously, a firm can use technology to create value for their consumers, or they can not use technology to create value for your consumers. And we've all seen a number of different things in the past with regards to companies and how ineffectively they've actually used technology before. I always give a couple of examples with regards to companies that really have failed to adapt to changes in technology. And the companies that I usually provide are Borders, for example, and Blockbuster. Borders, as you all know, was very heavily invested in selling, physical books. And at that point in time, the mentality was that nobody wanted to buy a digital book. Why would you want to do that? Don't you want to hold it physically, smell the book, feel it in your hands, turn the pages one by one? It's all about the experience. There's no reason that anyone would want a digital book. It just feels very impersonal because really that's the way we've always done it. On a side note, if anyone tells you that's the way we've always done it, that is not a very good reason. That typically means they don't know why they're doing that. They just do that because that's really what they're used to. So just kind of a side note there. But as you all know, we've kind of been able to see what's happened after the fact, so to speak, is that there has been this rush towards digital technology, particularly digital book downloads. And Amazon was one of the first to adopt that technology and really pioneer it and make it, commercialize it, and market it towards the masses. And although Borders made an attempt to get into that particular market, it was far too late. Damage had already been done. Amazon had too much market share at that point to really compete with effectively. Even Barnes & Noble is having some difficulties because they're finding that although the Nook has been successful and they've sold fairly well, that it takes a lot of resources to build that type of business. And they don't have the resources necessarily to offer that, so to speak. So that's one thing that they have to consider. Blockbuster. Obviously, we all know Blockbuster, familiar with them. Went through Chapter 11, was recently purchased by Dish Network. And they offered, movies in store, $4 or $5 or so for renting, late fees, those types of things. Netflix comes along and offers a completely different model. You can order movies, have a queue online, DVDs get sent to you. Then they came out with this streaming online business where you didn't even have to order movies to get them. You can actually just stream them directly through an Xbox or different set-top box device. And so those types of things were failed to adapt to. Obviously Blockbuster got into the mail order business, but it was too late and they didn't have the resources set up. And so companies need to be cognizant of what's happening with technology, because even if you think that it won't impact you, it probably will. So not necessarily something that you can predict per se, but you can see trends, see things starting to form. eBay is an example of a company that no one saw coming, because why would you want to buy something without even seeing it? At that point in time, people like shopping in stores. You would go, hold the product, test it out, make sure it worked. There's this type of connection between the person and the product, which I know sounds ridiculous, but at that point in time, that was the way business was done. That was the way that people bought things. So why would you buy things online? eBay, as we know, now has been very successful and has really pioneered buying things online. We've seen Craigslist. We've seen every company has an internet site. Online purchasing is very successful, of course. And so those are things that obviously have come as a result of technology. So once again, it's important for firms to be able to create value for constituents, and they have to be aware of the different types of technology available to them if they are going to be able to do that. Next, the sociocultural environment. The sociocultural environment encompasses values, customs, and demographic characteristics of society. These are things that actually happen, and you need to understand them because they provide you with opportunities. And we've all seen different things that have happened within late. Most recently, according to the 2010 census, the Hispanic population is now the majority in the Central Valley. And that provides a lot of opportunity for businesses now. And you're seeing a lot more marketing and advertising towards the Hispanic, that Hispanic demographic, because of the fact that it is the most populated demographic. And obviously it's an untapped resource. It's an untapped market, so to speak. So you're seeing a lot of competition for advertising space on Spanish programming. You're seeing a lot more advertising in Spanish and those different types of things as a result of that new opportunity. Next, the economic environment. Obviously what happens in an economy does have a direct impact on the actual business. Most notably things like the unemployment rate, and consumer confidence, and different things like that. In a strong economy, you typically have people that have jobs. Unemployment is fairly low, and in 2007 or so, unemployment was roughly 5.5%, which is relatively good, especially in today's terms, where we're at 8.5% as of last month, or as of December of 2011. So that's extremely important. In a strong economy, people have jobs. It's difficult to attract top talent because they already have jobs. You have to offer more money, more benefits. In a weaker economy, which like the one that we're in now, where you have millions of people without work, there are more people looking for jobs. So companies can be more selective. They can pay less, offer fewer benefits, because they know that you may not have as many options or many opportunities to accept jobs, and people will typically now take that first offer as opposed to kind of waiting a little bit, sitting on it, testing the water, so to speak, and seeing what other opportunities they have at their disposal. Consumer confidence is extremely important, because if consumers are not confident that their conditions are going to improve within the next few months or next year, then they're more likely to save money. Now remember, if you don't know if you're going to be able to pay rent or pay to keep the lights on, the last thing you're going to be doing is going out and buying flat screen TVs or purchasing cars. At least I hope that you wouldn't be. So we don't like that necessarily as an economy, because when people save, that's less money getting pumped into the economy, less sales tax revenue being forwarded over to governments, less need for businesses to have jobs, right? So obviously everything kind of goes round and round based on how much people actually spend, and so we do like those things. So obviously businesses are very in tune with what's happening in the economy. They know if consumer confidence is low, the demand for their products, particularly those products that are considered to be maybe luxuries and non-necessities, jewelry, vacations, those types of things, maybe be in short supply, which would in turn put them in a position to where they may have to go ahead and lay off workers, so to speak. So obviously things that need to be considered, and all those different types of things. So for this lecture, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We got roughly about 30-35 minutes or so, and then we're going to pick up next going over some of the different economic systems. Thank you very much.